Welcome to meeting number 100 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. Welcome, Ms. Ashton, and everybody else is here in person. I think, Ms. Ashton, you've done lots of Zoom ones. You know how to run everything. So I'll just get right into, we have, a bit of a housekeeping thing. The Leader of the Government in the House announced that Thursday, March 21st, 2024 will be the final allotted day in the current period, which means that all votes in the Supplementary Estimate C 2023-24 will be deemed reported to the House since the ordinary hour of daily adjournment on Monday, March 18th, 2024. Already got that? As such, any committee studying the Supplementary Estimate C after Monday, March 18th, 2024 will not do so under order of reference from the House. This study and subsequent report, if desired by the committee, will have to be done under Standing Order 108. Please note that in this case, the committee will not adopt the votes. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, February 26, 2024, the committee is meeting to discuss the subject matter of the Supplementary Estimate C. So we won't be reporting back to the House. It's subject matter only. That's what that tells us. With that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses to the table today, and starting with the Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services. Welcome, Minister. From the department, we have many officials. Thank you for being here. Starting with Gina Wilson, Deputy Minister, Candace Saint-Aubin, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, and I apologize now if I mess up anybody's names. You can correct me when we get into questions. Paula Hayden-Jokiel, is that close? Okay. Assistant Deputy Minister, Natalie Nepton, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Education and Social Development Programs and Partnerships, Nelson Barbosa, Director General, Regional Operations, Katrina Peddle, Director General, Act Respecting First Nations, Inuit and Métis Children, Youth and Families Branch, Jessica Sultan, Director General, Economic and Business Opportunities, Lands and Economic Development, Jonathan Ellen, Acting Director General, Education and Social Development Programs and Partnerships, and Philippe Thompson, Chief Finances, Results and Delivery Officer. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to use a little card system here. So yellow means 30 seconds left, red, time's up. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up your thoughts, and we'll continue on with the next speaker. So with that, Minister, I assume you're going to do the opening statement for 5 minutes. And when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the officials for taking their time away from their busy jobs to be with me today. But I thought it would be good to have the team with us so that they can answer to the level of detail that I think this committee deserves. It's truly a joy to be with you here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people pour vous parler des progrès que le gouvernement libéral fait.
To tell you about the progress the Liberal government is making on reconciliation, we have to go back 8 years. When we were elected in 2015, the Conservatives were far from friendly to Indigenous partners. And in the last 8 years, under Justin Trudeau, reconciliation has become a priority.
That begins with water. As you know, the previous Conservative government ignored the needs of First Nations communities for clean water, and as a result, when we were elected, 105 long-term boil water advisories were in place. But today, after working with communities and increasing investments by over 150%, the vast majority of First Nations have clean drinking water they can trust. We still have 4% of communities that live with a long-term advisory, but there is a plan underway for each of them, and Canadians can follow along online in terms of where communities are at. We do need, as we know, to be focused on sustained equitable support for water systems, because if we don't have ongoing investments in not just the equipment that serves First Nations people, but for the training and for the maintenance, all of that progress could vanish. Reconciliation is not a destination, it's a journey, and it requires a long-term commitment, regardless of which party is leading the country. So that's why Bill C-61, the First Nations Clean Water Act, is so important to partners. This piece of legislation was developed through historic participation with First Nations, and it restores the rights of First Nations to manage their own water systems. And for the very first time in our history, it holds the federal government accountable for equitable funding for water systems in First Nations. In fact, it installs an ability for First Nations to work with the Government of Canada to determine levels of funding that will ensure that clean water for generations to come. The AFN is calling on Parliament to pass that bill because, as Chief Erica Baudouin of Coassus First Nation said, Indigenous people, Indigenous children deserve to be conceived, born, and die with clean water access. And so it was distressing for partners who were in the audience that day to see, on the first day of debate, a Conservative member of Parliament choose instead to repeat very tired stereotypes, ignoring the discriminatory funding as a cause of that lack of water. And many First Nations people were deeply hurt by those comments, and many are still waiting for a sincere apology. Les peuples autochtones créent.
Indigenous peoples are also creating change in housing. I was recently celebrating the construction of new homes in Liard First Nation with Chief Charlie. He told me housing is intrinsic to health and well-being. You know this as well as I do. There is still a lot of work to be done.
The Auditor General yesterday shows that decades of colonialism and underinvestment have had significant and deep impacts on Indigenous communities. And it's why our Liberal government has increased spending on housing for Indigenous people by over 1,100%. For the first time in recent history, the proportion of people living in overcrowded homes has stabilized and is starting to decrease. It's a huge contrast to the approach of the previous government, which resulted in only 99 houses built in First Nations for the cost of $300 million. In contrast, since 2015, over 34,000 homes have been built or renovated in First Nations, with 22,000 already completed. And this is fundamental because, as all of you know, better housing means more people can reach their true potential. Mr. Chair, I've said it already, reconciliation is not a destination, it's a relationship, and respect is at the foundation of every good relationship. We must work directly with communities to address their needs, tackle the systemic issues that they are facing, and transfer the service delivery back under their control. Now, I know this is an uncomfortable approach for those that are more comfortable with the paternalism of the past, but paternalism has not resulted in healthy communities and people. This government is working to live up to the promise of a Canada where everyone can truly reach their full potential, and we can only do that in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Miigwech, Kuyanemik, merci, merci, thank you.
Timing. Thank you, Minister. We're going to go into our first round of questions, which are 6 minutes each. And first up, I have Mr. Schmale. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for appearing today. Minister, I met with the Nisi Chawe Ashik Cree Nation today, and they had mentioned that in 2019 they were approved tender-ready, shovel-ready for their medical center in 2019, but yet they have yet to receive funding. I'm short on time, but in 30 seconds or left, can you explain why?
Well, as you would know, MP Schmale, medical centers and health provision is a joint responsibility of the province and the federal government, along with the First Nations who often deliver care through nursing centers. I can tell you that negotiations of that kind are underway on a regular basis for many different infrastructure projects, but I would have to turn to officials about that specific project.
Very quickly, please.
Thank you for that. I think, Minister, you've covered the big points, and thank you for the question. There are ongoing conversations. As you can imagine, there are several requests in the system right now, and we look forward to continuing to work with communities to ensure that the funding flows quickly and that there can be actual shovels in the ground to ensure that it's ready.
Thank you very much. Minister, as you know, 133 chiefs in Ontario have come together to come out against the carbon tax. In fact, they're taking your government to court because they do not feel that they were heard. Some of these chiefs are in your riding. Do you feel that it's time to axe the tax?
Well, I think I've responded to this question before, certainly in the media, and in fact, that's a misrepresentation of what the letter says. In fact, what the letter says is that the chiefs would like a larger percentage of the carbon, they would like a larger rebate from the carbon tax. And in fact, should that not be possible, obviously they did. They wanted they wanted a positive answer from the government. And I'm really pleased to say that the finance minister just a couple of days ago has signed off on doubling the rebate for Indigenous communities from 1% to 2%. So that is going to be good news for the Chiefs of Ontario. And I'm really looking forward to being able to work with the Chiefs of Ontario on their priorities, which is making, of course, life affordable for First Nations people and keeping a healthy environment for the next generations, in fact, the next 7 generations to come.
Right. So the carbon tax on the cost of fuel, on the cost of food, on the cost of transport, and the cost of the actual retailer selling it, that all has implications across the chain. I seem to miss how they are actually getting a better quality of life if throughout that food chain the costs are going up each and every way. And as the parliamentary budget officer has showed, the rebates are not helping non-Indigenous Canadians. Indigenous peoples are now dealing with the fact that the rebate is next to nothing. I still don't understand how life is becoming more affordable.
I will tell you that the conversations I have with First Nations people really focus on 2 things. One, to end the ongoing colonialism that Indigenous people have faced at the hands of many governments, but in particular under the previous government, which not only didn't invest in First Nations communities, but refused to meet with First Nations leaders to talk about these very issues. The second most common thing I talk about with First Nations people is actually the climate. And in Alberta, the Chiefs...
Did you take a meeting with the Ontario Chiefs when they asked for a meeting regarding the carbon tax?
I have met with the Ontario Chiefs multiple times, and in fact, Glenn Hare and I are colleagues and acquaintances, and I would say that I will meet with any First Nations chief that wishes to do so and do so on a regular basis. But let me finish my thought, Mr. Chair. In Alberta, when I met with Albertan chiefs just recently, a few months back, their biggest concern was what was going to happen with the drying up aquifers and the lack of water that, in fact, the entire province is dealing with right now. And it's a deep concern because, in fact, this means that not only is it going to prevent access to drinking water, but all of the other ways that water is used by First Nations communities for economic development is hampered by the ongoing onslaught of climate change. And that is the second most frequent thing I talk about.
So you mentioned water advisories. So Niskanta, in my friend Eric Melillo's riding, has been on a boil advisory for 29 years. Can you please update us on the status of that situation?
Absolutely.
In 30 seconds or less.
Absolutely. And I hope Mr. Melillo has visited Niskantaga. I have, and I have a deep relationship with Chief Munias. As a matter of fact, he was in Ottawa just a few weeks ago and is quite happy with the progress that we're making. There are a number of conditions that he thinks needs to be in place, and we agree, our engineers agree, before he is comfortable with proceeding with a lift. But he feels very confident that for the very first time, he is working with a government that is listening to Nishkantaga's needs. And I invite you to visit Nishkantaga and meet Chief Munias. They are an incredible community.
Well,
I
can tell you Mr. Melillo is doing a great job for that riding, bringing
I
their
hope that
concerns
he's
to Ottawa.
visited Nishkantaga. I certainly would love to bring you anytime.
Well, Minister, this is my
Mr.
time, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about housing now because you brought it up in the Auditor General's report. The Auditor General is showing that there doesn't seem to be any improvement in housing since 2015. In fact, only one of the ISC regional offices collected information about the mold strategy, which was created in 2008. Can you explain why?
Well, I can certainly tell you that for the very first time in the history of this country, we're seeing a stopping of the loss of housing. And that's important because, in fact, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, year after year, we were seeing a decline in the availability of housing for First Nations. Do we have more to do? We absolutely, without a doubt, have more to do. We have a massive investments ahead of us, and it will take all of us, in fact, not voting against things like investments in affordable housing on First Nation that I have seen and noted that your members vote against time and time again. That, quite frankly, is shameful.
Actually,
what
we're
we need
voting
all parties to
against
do.
confidence in this
What we
government.
all
That's
need,
what we're voting
what we need
against.
all
Thank you,
parties to
Minister.
do is to pull together and insist that we spend more money to close that gap. And I look forward to doing that work with
Well,
you.
more money is being
We're
spent
out of
than
time
ever,
on
and
this
the
round,
conditions
so
not getting any better.
I'm going to cut off this round of questions and go to the next. I have Mr. Pawlowski first up for the.
Welcome to committee, Patty. I wanted to ask you for an update on where the $2 billion that our government had committed for Indigenous health will be going. I think the last time we spoke, I think you quite rightly said you were waiting to hear from Indigenous communities themselves as to where they'd like to see the money go. But I wanted to, and I'm going to give you a prolonged period to respond to this question, but let me just talk about a few of the things I've heard from the Indigenous community within my riding. Certainly one of the suggestions from Fort William First Nations was about the possibility of funding their chronic care home. As I think you know, both Chief Solomon and Chief Collins have really made that a priority in healthcare. The second thing I wanted to ask about was funding for land-based treatment, both for addictions and mental health, which again, several different Indigenous communities in my riding have asked me about. They're looking for funding for that. Lastly, about any funding to go for Indigenous people who live off reserve. As you know, a lot of Indigenous people kind of spend part of their time on reserve, part of their time off reserve. Thunder Bay has a large Indigenous population. So I wonder if you could answer the question overall, but also in response to those three specific areas. And you're welcome to ask any of your many able
Thank you.
there.
And I will for some of the details. But let me just start with the $2 billion Health Equity Fund, which I think I'm really glad you raised this. This is an innovative new support for First Nations who have Indigenous people, quite frankly, across the country who have oftentimes faced extreme racism in healthcare systems and provincial and territorial systems. In fact, it arises from the situation, the sad case of Joyce Echaquan, as you know, who died filming her own abuse and led to the Indigenous Healthcare Summit held during the pandemic, where we heard from health experts, Indigenous health experts, and individuals about what we could do together to better experience, to better help with the experiences that Indigenous people face in healthcare every day. And it's ongoing, by the way. I don't want to leave the impression that Joyce was an isolated incident. These kinds of things are happening every day in every healthcare system, either intentionally or oftentimes through systemic design that just doesn't meet people's needs. And quite frankly, these systems have been designed in ways that exclude the realities of Indigenous people. So the Prime Minister committed to this $2 billion Health Equity Fund to help Indigenous groups and leaders, communities who have innovative ideas about how to bridge that gap between healthcare provision in provinces and territories with the expectations that they have in terms of better health outcomes. And it complements the work that Minister Holland's doing on renewing those healthcare transfers, which, by the way, I've been at all of those meetings with provinces and territories with Indigenous partners to talk about our expectation that we eliminate racism in healthcare. So I will turn to Candace to talk about how that money is getting divided and some of the innovation that you're hearing about how people will use that money.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the question. The Indigenous Health Equity Fund will be flowing out to communities regionally April 1st. We are currently engaging in how that will be implemented. As you are aware, this will provide a 10-year funding, sustainability, and maximizing innovation. So that could be, and certainly we're encouraging communities to look at what their needs are and invest in that. And by the 10 years, they're able to move that money around to target different initiatives, including land-based treatment, as you were talking about, certainly looking at how best to address substance and opioid realities that we're seeing in community, but also working with provinces to try and leverage the funding that's currently going into the health transfers and to maximize those. It could be much more clinical care, but also really around virtual hubs, supporting e-health, in particular mental health e-health, to maybe alleviate some of the medical transportation that's required in more northern remote communities. We do see a lot of innovation happening at the community level that they're driving. This is allowing them greater flexibility to plan those and maybe amplify those.
Are you considering funding chronic care homes? Again, that's big in Fort William First Nations, and I think also Rainy River First Nations.
So what I would say, and that's a valuable question, what I would say is it's really the beauty of the Indigenous Health Equity Fund is that it is up to communities to determine where that need is. We are not prescriptive. We allow broad flexibilities because we do already provide a level of funding.
Having said that, there's a lot of Indigenous communities, a lot of competing interests, how are you going to kind of determine who you're going to fund? And when will that funding stream become open for communities to apply?
So to be clear, it's not an application base, and I was really personally insistent on that as the minister, because application base usually preferences communities that have good grant writers' ability to apply for grants. And in fact, the Auditor General spoke about this in housing access, housing money access. And so we're trying to think through how we ensure that people get the money regardless regardless of their capacity to write a grant, quite frankly. And so this money will be sent out April 1st to, as my colleague said, to regional governance, to local governance, to people that are actually delivering healthcare or working with partners to deliver healthcare. And after that is sent out, we can certainly send a list. I would just lastly say, Marcus, that it is really designed in a flexible way so that First Nations can use it in whatever way they want. But I have seen some really interesting things that are about bridging the gap between Western medicine and Indigenous medicine. So in Manitoba, for example, we've funded in previous types of program funding health ombudsmen, so that actually if an Indigenous person is not getting the care they need in downtown Winnipeg, this might interest you, MP Carr, because it's in your neck of the woods, the health ombudsman through the Manitoba Chiefs Council is able to actually take those concerns from the individual and then act as an advocate for that individual within the Manitoba healthcare system. Something I'm hoping that we'll be able to work more closely with that province with the election of its first First Nations premier.
Great, thank you. We're out of time on that one. I should have mentioned, we're a pretty collegial group here, and the members try to get as many questions out as they can. And so when anybody has the floor, I'd say get your question out. And we also want to make sure that the minister and her team have time to respond. And so we'll just have a nice discussion as we go through this afternoon. And I direct that to all members just so we have a good conversation today. With that, Monsieur Lemire, the floor is yours now for your 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the Minister for being here today. One of the aspects that is not mentioned in the supplementary estimates is housing, and housing is essential. In Quebec only, we have $8 billion in needs, $44 billion in Canada. So I want to approach this from a more positive point of view and recognize the contribution of First Nations and Inuits in Quebec and the work that they have done. Quebec is the province that has been doing the best when it comes to creating and prioritizing capacity in First Nations. And Quebec is making more progress than other provinces. And the contribution of Indigenous financial institutions is also important. There's SOCA of the Wendake, for instance, and it's essential to developing this capacity. They filed their requests for longer-term financing in pre-budget consultations on 31st of March 2024, so tomorrow morning. They're asking actually for $150 million for mortgages. And the federal government doesn't seem to be really providing an answer to Indigenous communities when it comes to long-term predictability. And there is an initiative, which is social innovation initiative by Indigenous communities. So are you going to engage with the Minister of Finance to follow and answer and respond to these financial requests by Indigenous communities?
Pardon?
You met with Chief Lance Hayman.
Yes. And I am working with the Minister of Finance every day on this file.
Minister Hayman, Chief Hayman, Lance Hayman, recently about, for example, you raised mortgages and how we can actually finance mortgages in First Nations. I think the Minister of Finance is very interested in that idea. And so we'll continue to pursue those innovative ideas that are coming from Indigenous people. That's what's so great about this. I think, the days of Canada telling Indigenous people how to solve these problems is over. We've obviously not been able to be dictating to First Nations exactly what the solutions are. So we're very excited when Chief Hayman and others come forward to talk about different ownership structures that could work within the context of a First Nation. Merci.
Miigwech, effectivement, merci de souligner la contribution de
Thank you for underlining the contributions of chiefs from, especially from my riding in the Témiscamingue region as well. But of course, we have to have confidence in First Nations in a matter like this, and especially in Quebec, they want to take ownership of housing as a general issue. And there's the Inyananshia initiative to this end, and they're trying to build a common spaces, and they underline the individual responsibility in housing and sustainable use and development of resources and lands. So I appreciate your answer, but of course, we will have to wait and see the result in the context that we have currently. So the Auditor General was critical of the passive posture of the department. What would you like to respond, Minister? And are you going to come up with an in-depth reform of the practices and policies of Indigenous Services Canada in light of the results that we have seen so far, which have been criticized?
Well, I mean, two things. One, I would say that, passive response of the department, I'm not sure that's accurate from what I see every single day. I would say that the department works with the fiscal resources it has, and in fact is very ambitious about getting any extra dollars out the door. And oftentimes when dollars are about to lapse for housing because projects haven't been built or they're not underway, the department will come to me and ask to reprioritize that money to communities that can use that money. So we're very, very cautious and careful to not let any money lapse, because we need that money because there is such a great need across the country. So I would say that I haven't seen that in the space of housing at all. What I can say, though, is that, and I think you're talking about this part of the Auditor General's report, where she talks about vulnerable communities and how far away sometimes vulnerable communities are from actually being able to access housing. And in that case, we have a number of different First Nations-led agencies that will help communities to gain the governance skills and fiscal skills that they need to be able to move forward more quickly. And I know the department works with those communities as well, can actually provide a lot of support to those communities and certainly connect them to these Indigenous-led institutions so that they have a greater capacity. And I will just say, before anyone says that this is in any way undermining the skills and talent of Indigenous peoples, communities are often under a huge degree of stress. Most chiefs I know are not just elected officials like us. They are also responding to middle
Minister,
of the night.
I'm going to have to interrupt just briefly. I see that there are bells again.
Okay.
And so I'm going to check with the committee to see if we have unanimous consent to proceed through bells. If we are people going to want to go upstairs to vote, or do you want to vote remotely? And so I know if I give 10 minutes. Okay, keep going, and we'll make sure that I will let people know when the vote happens.
If I can just finish that one thought, Mr. Chair, because I think it's important to understand that communities that have a deep a state of distress, those chiefs are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. They are literally putting out fires. They are answering calls at all times of day and night. And so our job, I think, as a government and as a country, is to support those chiefs as they begin to stabilize their communities. And that's how we work with those fragile communities, to ensure that they have the supports they need.
Great, thank you.
Merci. Je fais juste ajouter.
Thank you. I'm just going to add that I will also table a motion before the committee so that we can look into many aspects underlined by the Auditor General in connection with First Nations. It would be very important for the committee to hear from Ms. Hogan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go now to Ms. Ashton. So when you're ready, Ms. Ashton, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Minister, over the next 2 years, Indigenous Services Canada plans on sunsetting funding streams and cutting spending on programs like Jordan's Principle, dealing with the harmful legacy, programs that deal with the harmful legacy of residential schools and support for mental health. Indigenous Services Canada plans on $500 million worth of cuts in the next 4 years. While the department has reassured Indigenous communities, leaders, that these massive cuts won't affect services, we have never seen in our history, and certainly not in recent history, a proposed cut and the sunsetting of this much money. We know that the elimination of these critical programs will be devastating for communities that already rely on them and that need all the support they can get. At a time where the need is so great, why is your government choosing to cut rather than invest in First Nations?
Well, thank you very much. And as I've said publicly and repeatedly, this government is not cutting services and not cutting any service, not reducing any spending initiatives that would impact service delivery to Indigenous communities. The reductions that you see in our departmental plan are related to internal operating efficiencies, some program funding that's not being utilized, specifically the new fiscal agreement money that has not had the uptake that we had hoped. Certainly can go back to it if we see a greater uptake. But the premise of your question is incorrect. In fact, the programs that you reference are ongoing. We have a legal commitment to Jordan's Principle, for example, and this government has every intent to uphold it.
Okay, I think we'll have to agree to disagree because the sunsetting of this much, these kinds of investments are not seen as good news for anybody on the ground. Let's move to housing. If you ask me to describe one of the government's biggest failures when it comes to Indigenous communities, it would be on housing, and I think the Auditor General's report certainly proves that. We heard yesterday that since the Liberals took over in 2015, there's been, quote, no meaningful improvement, unquote, in housing on reserve, and that it's highly unlikely that your government will meet its 2030 targets. I see the housing crisis in community after community here in northern Manitoba. First Nations like Shamattawa, Poplar River, Garden Hill, Pucketawagan are clear that they face a housing crisis. We heard a number of shocking statements in the report from the Auditor General yesterday. She highlighted that since 2015, ISC has spent less than 7% of what's needed to end the housing gap on reserve. How do you justify this lack of action of First Nations living in overcrowded, moldy, and inhumane conditions?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I'll first say that no one should justify anyone living in those conditions. And as I said in my media response yesterday at the press conference, I seriously hope that Canadians have the same fervor for housing as they have had for water, because I certainly think that every government, this one and into the future, needs to remain focused on alleviating the ongoing gap for Indigenous peoples, including in housing. And I will say that, as I said in my response to one of your colleagues here in the room, that housing and infrastructure deficits are one of the most frequent things that I speak about with First Nations chief across the country. So that is why this government remains committed to closing that gap. You're right, the 2030 gap is ambitious. And so we know that the federal government has to work with partners to be able to close that gap. We are certainly making the investments, an 1,100% increase in the funding of housing since 2015. 34,000 homes is nothing to sneeze at, especially when you compare it to the previous government's abysmal performance in this space. But I will say that those investments must be sustained. And in order to build from where we are now, which is now we are at a space where we're not seeing increased overcrowding. We're starting to see communities level off. We're starting to have positive feedback from First Nations that are controlling and designing their own solutions to ongoing housing challenges, that we have to continue to accelerate that gain. And we do that by the continued investment.
Climate change, as you know, is hitting Indigenous communities hardest. In our region, this is evident in many ways. One of the most evident is the way in which ice roads have become increasingly unreliable. For isolated First Nations, this is a matter of life and death. First Nations in our region are clear. There needs to be a revival of the East Side Road Authority initiative, and federal investment is required. Is your government prepared to support the call for all-weather road infrastructure, including an airport for Wasagamak First Nation, investment in the road being proposed between St. Teresa Point and Barons River, and a northern route to service First Nations like Oxford House, Garden Hill, and First Nations in between?
Well, thank you very much. And in terms of the Wasagamak Airport, you would know, MP Ashton, that I have been working with my colleague, the Minister of Transport, on this and have shared with him your advocacy. And I want to thank you for that, because you're absolutely right. We have been extremely worried about the state of ice roads this year. And it has a massive impact, as you've pointed out, on everything, including the cost of building housing. So infrastructure development in remote communities depends on materials and equipment being shipped up during ice road season, and those seasons are getting shorter and shorter. So we will continue to do whatever it takes to make sure that essential resources are shipped, but I think this calls for a larger conversation amongst multiple departments and provincial and territorial partners, because I think we are facing down a very immediate crisis related to climate change. And I'm glad you started with climate change, and it is a pleasure to work with a party that acknowledges that climate change is real and is having extraordinary fiscal impacts on First Nations that include the inability to be able to get goods and equipment up to communities in a cost-effective way.
Okay, we're out of time on time in that round.
Yep.
So
Okay.
we'll go to our slightly shorter rounds now. I do want to check with everybody just to confirm we're 21 minutes away, just under 22 minutes away from the vote. Are people comfortable or okay to vote remotely? And so we'll go right up until when the vote starts. I'll then suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes while people vote, and then we'll resume as quickly as possible. Ms. Ashton, are you okay with that as well? Yeah, okay, perfect, thank you. So the next round, first questions for 5 minutes, and Mr. Janis, the floor is yours.
Chair, Minister Hajdu, Canadians would expect that the Indigenous procurement system be designed to benefit Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities, not a small number of well-connected NDP Liberal government insiders. Dalian is a two-person company. They don't do actual work. They just get government contracts and subcontract to others. How many Indigenous people benefited from the $7.9 million that your government sent to Dalian for ArriveScam?
I think I'll just blow by all the stupid slogans and answer the question. Well, I'll tell you that the Indigenous Business Directory is...
I'd love for you to answer the question. How many Indigenous people benefited from the $7.9 million that your government gave to Dalian for ArriveScam?
So I think I'll just blow by the stupid slogans and begin by answering the question in a sincere way, which is what I would hope we would all do around this table, because these are serious issues and sincere concerns. Let me just back up and say Indigenous Services Canada does manage...
Please don't back up. Please just answer the question.
I would love to do that. Are you ready to listen?
Go for it.
All right, great.
How many Indigenous people benefited? Just the number would be fine, actually.
So the Indigenous Business Directory is a directory that Indigenous Services Canada maintains to provide to other departments of Canada a list of businesses that have been verified as either...
Sorry, Minister, this is a two-person company. They don't do any actual work. They're listed on the Indigenous Businesses Directory. They receive contracts and subcontract. That's all they do. They get government contracts. They subcontract the work to others.
Okay.
How many Indigenous people benefited from the $7.9 million that your government gave to Dalian? I'm not looking for a history of the program.
Point of order,
I'm just looking
Mr.
for a
Chair.
number.
Well, I think that...
Sorry, just 1 second. I'll stop the clock. Mr. Batiste, what's your point of order?
The member has asked, it's repetition. She's trying to answer the question.
Repetition.
The minister keeps getting
Jamie, respectfully learn the
as she does
rules,
it.
okay? It's not a point of order, and it's not a repetition issue.
Well,
I'm
this
repeating the
committee, we give the
question
minister time to
because I
do
want
this.
the
I know
answer.
you're coming in from another committee, but
She's a minister, you're not. Let her answer.
We are
Okay.
into debate. We are into debate, but I will say that, as I noted, we ask the minister questions. We allow the minister to
Yeah.
answer.
Just the number. That's all I need.
So I'll turn the floor to the minister and to continue with your response, please.
So to understand the Indigenous Business Directory, you have to understand what it's for. And the Indigenous Business Directory is to provide assurances to other departments, including Procurement Canada, that the people on that list are Indigenous. And so that is the sole purpose of the list. It's about indigeneity.
Okay. Minister, what Mr. Yeo told the Public Accounts Committee yesterday is that the purpose of the program is not to benefit Indigenous communities, but only to benefit the particular individuals who receive the contracts. what you've just said effectively confirms that. It sounds like you have no information about whether Indigenous peoples or communities actually benefited beyond the 2 people who got $7.9 million for no work. Of all Dalian's contracts, totaling at least $91 million under your government, did all of those $91 million worth of contracts benefit from the Indigenous procurement set aside? And what percentage of the subcontractors were Indigenous?
I would like, I'm actually kind of annoyed by this question because it implies that if an Italian person owned a company, then only Italian people should benefit from that company's business. And in that is an implicit, I would say, stereotype. Indigenous business owners are just like non-Indigenous business owners. And some Indigenous business owners have many Indigenous employees. In fact, many businesses do.
Minister, I'm going to spare you the false indignation here. Okay.
Your question is implicitly
no, Mr. Chair, I'm going to jump in accordance with the rules.
Discriminatory.
Yeah, of course. Here we go, Minister. Your government faces intense heat over this corruption scandal, and your response, your only response, is not to answer the question, but to accuse other people of racism. This is so typical of your government.
Mr.
Now, I'm going to finish, Minister. Here are the facts, right? Dalian is a 2-person company. They don't have employees. There's just 2 of them, right? So does it seem to you a problem that this company can get close to $100 million worth of contracts from your government? They don't do any work. They subcontract. That there's no tracking of whether Indigenous people actually benefit. There's no tracking about whether other Indigenous businesses receive subcontracts. And that simply by being the middleman, they're able to claim this massive set-aside when there is no tracking of actual benefits to Indigenous communities across the country. Don't you think that's a problem?
What I would say is that whatever has happened, contractors should be held accountable, regardless of whether they're Indigenous or not. The rules don't
But do you think this is an abuse of the Indigenous procurement program? Do you think this is an abuse of the intention of the program?
Yeah, I would ask. There's only 10 seconds left.
I would say if people are on the list
minister
who are not Indigenous, it is an abuse, and that is why Dalian.
So you're fine with what happened with Dalian?
Okay, we're out of time on this one. I'm going to have to move to the next person. Next up, I have Mr. Carr for his 5 minutes.
Hi, Minister. As you know, I spent a lot of time in my career as an educator.
You did.
And during my time as an educator, I had the privilege of working with a lot of Indigenous students and their families in the northwest part of the city of Winnipeg, where I come from. One of the things I noticed, in addition to so many of the challenges that Indigenous families face still as a result of intergenerational trauma born from residential schools, colonial policies, all of the things that we're well aware of, is that within the education system itself, the public education system specifically, because of a shortage of educational opportunities, we often see students having to leave their communities to come down to the big cities, like Winnipeg, for example, where they're vulnerable. There's a bit of culture shock, there's susceptibility to gang influence, they're away from their families, and there are all sorts of different challenges that are posed as a result of this. A lot of it has to do with provincial government jurisdiction over education, of course, but I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about the role that the federal government has to play in supporting Indigenous education across the country, and if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the guidance or suggestions that you might be hearing from Indigenous leaders, specifically in relation to the education system in our country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for a sincere question. And I would say that, this is an area where I think our government has a lot to talk about, quite frankly. Prior to the election of the Liberals, the federal Liberals, we saw discriminatory funding levels for Indigenous education across this country, board after board. And what I mean by that is that the dollars spent per child, for lack of a better metric, was far lower for Indigenous communities than in a similar provincial system. And so we fixed that. We fixed that because we knew that education of young people is one of the best things that we can do to invest in our country and in the success success of each person. And so that has been a hallmark, I think, of our government, is to ensure that Indigenous education systems across this country have equitable funding as to what you could expect in provincial systems. We've, in fact, increased education by 80% since 2016. So, again, a big number, and it just defines how big the gap was prior to our election in 2015. Now, we're not just spending money through improving education systems, but we are also building and renovating schools with First Nations people, because many of the schools that children have been learning in have been, quite frankly, abysmal and left to rot by successive governments who really didn't make those kinds of investments. In the schools that I have an opportunity to visit, you can see bright, happy children and really content teachers in those facilities teaching in ways that are going to help those young people reach their education potential. The final thing I'll say is that we have been pursuing what we're calling and what is called regional education agreements, which restores Indigenous sovereignty over how education is delivered in communities. In fact, in Quebec, this was an amazing opportunity for me to be at the signing of one of these regional education authorities, and the young people, the educators, the students, the families, just celebrating the ability to be able to design their own curriculum, to be able to incorporate language and culture and tradition and healing into the curriculum that will allow for their children to have a fair shot at success, just like every other child in that province. And we've since then signed, I think, four regional education agreements, and we have a number underway. So we are transforming education in this country together with First Nations leading the way.
Thanks, Minister. I think I agree with you in terms of the quality of the relationship that I think the federal government is enjoying with the new provincial government in Manitoba. There's an alignment of values and an alignment of beliefs, I think, specifically to achieving more progress on the road to truth and reconciliation. I look forward to a continued conversation with you about some of the ways that we can work together with the province to address things like teacher shortages that we're seeing on reserve communities in the north, as well as addressing, you spoke about curriculum, and I'm very pleased to hear you substantiate some of the progress I know is being made. But there's all sorts of things, I think, that we have to look at in terms of colonial practices that still exist for students in the public education system. Again, I understand it's a provincial jurisdiction, but in many instances, these are kids coming from First Nation reserves ending up in the provincial system. So the partnership between the federal government and provincial government and local school boards is really critical to ensuring we offer them the support they need. So I thank you for your ongoing work in this regard and look forward to our continued work together.
Thank you, and we're out of time. We'll now go to Monsieur Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in August 2023, your department stated that there wouldn't be a reduction in the funds available in terms of services for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. But when we look at the 24-25 departmental plan, it is clear that the service delivery will be significantly impacted by budgetary cuts. The department envisages that the expenditure for Indigenous well-being and self-determination, so all services, will be around $2 billion. $20.7 billion for 2024-2025, so there will be a reduction in this number. And the reduction of expenditure for internal services will go from $282 million to $265 million in 24-25, which is roughly a 6% reduction. Again, you signed on these numbers, and there's also the objective of school infrastructure by 2030, but there will be $145 million of expenditure, but it's nowhere near sufficient, and the expenditure is deemed to be a lot higher than that. In Quebec, there's $3.9 million set aside for major renovation. Would you be able to justify these cuts in services, in essential services to Inuit, Métis, and First Nations communities? And What justifies that we are at this point, whereas you were saying that there wouldn't be any cuts? Thank you.
Well, I've been clear that there won't be any reductions to service levels and that the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative will not impact service delivery to Indigenous communities. And so the reductions that you see in the departmental plan are related to internal operating efficiencies. And any program funding that's not being utilized, for instance, funding that's no longer required from the fiscal framework. And I did mention the new fiscal relationship grant that, based on current and projected uptake, a portion of that funding won't be required from the fiscal framework at this point in time, amounting to $256.7 million over 5 years and $89.9 million in ongoing funding. But even with these cost savings, the new fiscal relationship grant escalator would remain fully funded. There will be no impact on the level of the escalator funding for current and future recipients. And so I think obviously...
Sorry, I'm just going to say, wrap it up. We're out of time.
So I'll just say again that this department is focused on making sure that they provide excellent service in an efficient way, and looking for efficiencies is an important part of the work that they do.
Okay. Thank you. And now, Ms. Ashton, we'll go to you for your 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to get to the issue of nursing shortages. We know that out of the 223 nurses ISC says it needs, 43 positions are unfilled. On top of that, more than half of the nurse positions that are filled by contract agencies who are only providing emergency care rather than primary care that First Nations deserve and desperately need. It's gotten so bad that communities are posting notices about the lack of nurses in their communities. When I was in Wasaga First Nation on February 20th. In front of the store, there was a notice that said the nursing station is closed due to nurse shortages starting the week of January 29th until further notice. Michikamak Cree Nation recently declared a state of emergency. Even though they're supposed to have 13 nurses, they had far fewer than that, 4. And when they declared the state of emergency, they were committed another 4, 8, still short of the 13 that they deserve, given how large the First Nation is, how large the community is. We know that nurses have been clear about the stress, the burnout that they face, and we know that communities are not getting the health care they deserve. In fact, I joined with First Nations leaders who've been very clear that this has had a devastating impact, including in cases of premature death. This is an urgent situation. What is ISC doing to help First Nations like Pimicikamak, like Wasagamak, like Little Grand Rapids, who have declared their states of emergencies or put forward these urgent notices? What is ISC doing to help work with them to lift these states of emergencies and ensure there are enough nurses to serve First Nations?
Well, thank you, MP Ashton. And I would say that this is a crisis that's affecting Canada. In fact, nursing shortages are profound in pretty much every community across this country, and they're even more profound in remote communities. And that's why Indigenous Services Canada has been so focused on what we can do to recruit and retain and train nurses to choose to work in the North, to stay in the North, and to build that internal capacity of communities by ensuring that more Indigenous people choose healthcare as a pathway for their own personal careers. We have used things like retention strategies, increased investments to ensure competitive pay, signing bonuses. Pretty much, we have thrown everything at the wall to get nurses in place. And I will tell you, there's nothing more stressful for a community, as you've pointed out, but certainly for my officials, because I see those messages that come through at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, where officials are working with communities just like the one you've mentioned, like many communities across northern and remote communities, to address these nursing shortages. So we're going to keep at it, obviously, and obviously whatever it requires, we will be there to try to ensure that communities have the complement of nurses they need, but furthermore, that we are investing in those kinds of innovations that communities are talking about that can have greater capacity now with the $2 billion health equity fund, with the health transfers, with willing provinces and territories who are interested in partnering with First Nations
Minister,
to get
if
the
I
health
could-
equity care that they
Sorry,
need.
we're out of
Yeah.
time on this one.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so now, colleagues, there's just over 3 minutes until the vote. We could either suspend now or start Mr. Melillo's 5 minutes. If you're okay being interrupted, I'll suspend the meeting while we vote, and then once everybody's confirmed that they voted, we'll resume and finish off this time that we have with the minister. We started at 5:11, so we'll try to wrap up as close to 6:11, less the suspension as we can. So, Mr. Melillo, would you like to start? Okay, so when you're ready, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I'd like to pick up on the Auditor General report that was mentioned earlier around housing. Of course, it notes that your government has supposedly committed to closing the gap on housing in First Nations by 2030, but the Auditor General has found that the department has no plan to do that, and that the number of homes that is needed to be replaced due to deteriorating conditions is actually increased since your government came into office. The report has also found that many of the nations most in need are not getting proper funding and, in fact, getting less funding. So how would you explain that disparity?
Thank you, and thank you for asking this question, because I think the more that we talk about Indigenous access to housing and First Nations, the better off this country will be. It's like water. We need Canadians to understand that this is of utmost priority to all of us. As I've answered this question before, first of all, the department does work very closely with communities to make sure that we understand their current needs and their ongoing needs and their infrastructure
Minister,
gap.
the Auditor General has said that the department has no plan to reach the 2030 goal that you've set.
I'm saying that the department works regularly and consistently with First Nations on the planning that they're undertaking to close those gaps, and we continue
do you
to
accept
have.
the Auditor General's report?
We accept all recommendations. I will be clear. The Auditor General has made good recommendations, including really focusing the work to make sure that the most vulnerable communities get the care that they need, which is part 2 of your question. But I will also say that what I have certainly learned over the last 2.5 years, and I know that the department knows very well, is that we must do this with Indigenous partners. We cannot do it to communities. We must ensure that Indigenous communities have the authority and autonomy.
On that, Minister, the Auditor General's report has also stated that your department is not working closely with First Nations to address this housing gap. So again, we're hearing one thing here, but the Auditor General's report, which you have said
I don't
that
think
you
she
accept.
said that we weren't working closely with First Nations. I think what she said was that some First Nations who are particularly vulnerable are having a hard time accessing the housing that they need. And that is certainly something that keeps me up at night. I know the department is working very closely with those communities to determine how we can better accelerate building housing and other infrastructure in those very vulnerable communities.
Okay, thank you very much. And just with the limited time, I'd like to ask you about another Auditor General report around policing, Minister. So in 2022, the government had said that they were going to work around the clock to get some legislation on the table to support Indigenous policing services. Of course, it's 2 years later. There are 3 policing services in Northern Ontario that will soon be without an agreement moving forward. Unfortunately, this is putting the lives of First Nations people at risk, as you know, in our region, Minister. It's not just the policing itself, but sometimes ambulance services or other emergency services aren't able to do their jobs because of the lack of policing. So why is it that your government is dragging its feet on this very important issue?
Thank you very much. I will say that we do a complementary line of business, if you will, with Indigenous communities called Pathways to Safe Indigenous Communities, and it is a self-determined ability for First Nations to increase programs, interventions, and services for community safety and well-being. But you will have to ask my colleague, Minister LeBlanc, questions about the work that he's doing on developing Indigenous policing legislation, and that is work that I know is very important and dear to this government's heart.
Again, Minister, you say it's very important, but 2 years ago it was promised that it would be right around the corner and that the government would be working around the clock to get it done. That doesn't seem to add up to what we're hearing from you here today with respect.
Well, I will say this. Oftentimes, the government has a timeline that is ambitious, but we also work in a respectful way in full consultation with partners. And I look forward to the results of Minister LeBlanc's consultations with Indigenous partners, because that will help us ensure that the legislation that is resulting
thank you, Minister.
Truly meets the needs of First Nations
I'd like to get
people.
one more question pertaining to the Federal Economic Development Agency in Northern Ontario, which, of course, you're the minister responsible for. Now, the service standards for providing response to applications have not been met for the Northern Ontario Development Program and the Regional Economic Growth through Innovation Program, according to the most recent information. You've said that addressing this issue is an important issue for you. Can you explain why the department is failing to meet those service standards?
So, colleagues, I just want to say the voting period
That's
has now
incorrect.
started. We're 15 seconds into it. Minister, if you'd like to offer a brief response, then we'll suspend and vote. And then
I would
come back in.
just say that is incorrect information, and that the service standards have been met within a large portion of the target. I think I'm not sure if President Gideon is here. The department works really closely, though, with programs or applicants, if you will, that haven't fully fleshed out their application yet. And so in those cases, those applications can take longer because they are not complete. And so the department works with those applicants to ensure that they have a successful return. But with applications that are complete and submitted for decision, those decisions are by and large returned in time.
Okay, and we're over a bit there. So, colleagues, I'm going to suspend. When I get confirmation that everybody's voted, we'll come back and go for the last 5 minutes to the Liberals, and then we'll end this session and switch panels and send our first guests on their way. So, for the moment being, we're suspended. And we're going to be finishing off now with one last 5-minute question, and Mr. Carr is going to take that, or Mr. Batiste. Okay.
I have two questions. First, Minister, I would like to get an update. We've heard often at this committee that the Indian Act continues to discriminate around the second generation cutoff, as well as when First Nations mothers have children, and if they don't declare the father, then they automatically presume that child is not a status Indian. I know that our government is taking steps to remedy that. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of a progress update on where we are in addressing the racism that still remains within the Indian Act, and a little bit about the housing progress that we've made. I know that the Auditor General has come out with a report, but I also know that we've significantly increased the amount of houses that are going to Indigenous communities, and I'm just wondering if you could give us the numbers and give us an update to get a full picture of what our government's response has been to Indigenous housing.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, MP Batiste, for being with me when we announced the beginning of the consultation process for the second generation cutoff. And so for members that are unaware of this issue, this is something deeply personal for many Indigenous people who, through one reason or another, have lost status and therefore their children lose status. And so those consultations are actually being designed with Indigenous people, so they are of utmost sensitivity. There are a lot of opinions. There are people that feel very strongly that we need to move quickly on second generation cutoff. I think some communities have other perspectives where they have seen people return to community and wondered how they're going to absorb new members for a whole host of reasons. So those consultations are going to be very important, I think, to hear all sides and to come up with a path that keeps people very comfortable with the direction. But you're right, the ongoing gender discrimination in the Indian Act is something that we've been working since 2015 to fix, and Bill C-38 is now working its way through the House, as I understand it, and we'll have a debate, I believe, later this week on C-38. So I look forward to all members supporting that legislation and not delaying it, because indeed families are waiting for answers. So thank you for bringing that up. On Indigenous-led housing, I will note an article recently out of Nova Scotia, actually, that Member 2 First Nation is building a record number of new homes, but all of its local contractors are too busy for more. And I think that's a really important acknowledgement that it's not only money that is the limiting factor for building more houses. I did speak about ice roads and the delay and interruption in getting materials to First Nations communities, but skilled tradespeople shortages. There are a number of other things that actually can delay infrastructure development in communities. And sometimes it can be even related to climate change. If a community is evacuated in the middle of infrastructure season, it can just upend the entire season, and communities will lose the season or lose the progress they've made. And it can be very expensive when communities lose the progress because, of course, a half-built housing complex left to the elements can actually mean that build has to be, in many cases, can't be salvaged. So I know that we have a long ways to go, but I will say that under this approach, we are looking at, I think, much faster progress. I do want to turn to Nelson a bit to talk about how we supported even quantifying the gap.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I want to acknowledge two things. One is success is measured not only in bricks and mortar, and there's been $2.3 billion spent since 2015 in housing specifically, and another $2 billion to follow. 20,000 projects are underway or will be completed by 2025. But partnership is also essential. I want to acknowledge and highlight the partnership and the co-development with the Assembly of First Nations on the First Nations housing and related infrastructure strategy. This was led by the First Nation, by the Assembly of First Nations, but also Indigenous Services Canada worked with all First Nations in 2022 to quantify the infrastructure gap. The infrastructure gap that was cited by the Auditor General is work that came from First Nations. And it's important to understand those needs, but it's also important to understand the partnership that's required in order to close the gap. The gap is substantive. We're seeing success, but success needs to follow the partnership model that this department believes so strongly in. So I want to thank you for your question. I'm pleased to kind of acknowledge the work that we have, but also want to lift up the success of First Nations in supporting the infrastructure in their communities. Thank you.
I don't think I have many seconds left, so that's it. Let's go. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Minister, and your team for being here today. I apologize for the disruptions from the votes, but that's the nature of the business here. With that, colleagues, we will suspend and bring in the second panel. So, Ms. Ashton, just stand by, and we'll get going again as soon as we get everybody seated here. And for the moment, we're suspended. meeting back to order. And I'd like to now thank or welcome our second panel. We have, for the second hour, we're going to be continue our discussion of the subject matter of the Supplementary Estimate C 2023-2024. We have the ministers, Gary Ann Nsangari, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, and the Honourable Dan Vandell, Minister of Northern Affairs. And from the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, I'd like to welcome Valerie Gideon, Deputy Minister, Martin Reiher, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Treaties and Aboriginal Government. We've spent a lot of time with you over the past while. Welcome back. Garima Dwivedi, Assistant Deputy Minister, Resolution and Partnerships. Georgina Lloyd, Assistant Deputy Minister, Northern Affairs. Krista Apps, Director General, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Secretariat. And Darlene Bess, Chief Finances, Results and Delivery Officer. And I apologize if I messed anybody's names up. We will go through a couple of rounds of questions here and see where we're at. But I believe, first of all, we have opening statements from both ministers. And not sure who's going first. Whenever you're ready, either Minister Vandell or Nsangari, the floor will be yours for 5 minutes. I'll use a handy card system, yellow, 30 seconds left, red, time's up. Wind up your thought, and we'll move on to the next person. Minister Vandell, it looks like you're ready, so the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Tansi Udlakut Kwekwe. I'm very happy to be here today to discuss and answer your questions on the 2023-24 supplementary estimates for Northern Affairs. The estimates reflect a net increase of $9 million for Northern Affairs. This increase in funding was used to address urgent capacity requirements for Indigenous organizations in the Northwest Territories due to wildfires and to reimburse expenses incurred to support their members during the wildfire emergency. The Communauté Nordique et
Northern and Indigenous communities are experiencing some of the most devastating effects of climate change. We are working with Northern and Indigenous partners to mitigate the impacts while helping communities reduce their dependence on expensive diesel through new community-managed renewable energy sources.
Solar and wind projects are leading the way in the clean energy transition with active support and investment from the federal government. In 2023, the government of Northwest Territories reported residents, communities, and territorial governments saved more than $12 million in energy costs because of clean energy projects like these right across the North. Partnerships and collaboration are a vital piece to strengthening food security in Northern and Arctic communities. Since 2021, we have expanded the Nutrition North program and implemented 90% of the recommendations from this committee's report on food security in northern and isolated communities. This is a significant step, and I want to thank all the members, past and present, for their work and their continued collaboration on addressing this complex issue. Engagement with communities and program partners led to the launch of food sovereignty programs like the Community Foods Programs and the Harvester Support Grant. Internally, we reallocated an additional $5 million to Nutrition North Canada through SUP Estimate C to support these initiatives, which help to offset costs of food and other essential items, improve access to traditional country foods, and support initiatives such as Meals for Elders and the school food programs. There is certainly much more work that needs to be done, and I look forward to engaging on a local level in communities with program partners in the upcoming months to find new ways to address food insecurity in the North and strengthen these partnerships. As a government, we have recognized the significant underfunding by past governments of all stripes when it comes to addressing housing and infrastructure gaps in the North. That's why we're working with Northern and Indigenous partners to increase access to safe, affordable housing and build on historic distinctions-based investments that are supporting the housing priorities in the territories and in Inuit Nunangat. On this note, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the historic signing of the Nunavut Devolution Agreement, one of the largest land transfers in Canada's history that will support that supports Nunavummiut self-determination. We will keep working in partnership to complete the transfer of responsibilities by April 1st, 2027. Le cadre stratégique pour l'Arctique.
The Arctic and Northern Policy Framework helps to ensure sustainable management of northern lands. Previous assessments have enabled evidence-based decisions to be made regarding oil and gas offshore the Arctic. And the aim here is to support responsible and sustainable development of natural resources in the North and Arctic. In doing so, the highest safety and environmental standards have been observed.
And steadfast in defending the Arctic and the people who live there. We are working with northern partners and communities to co-develop security strategies to making historical investments to increase our ability to defend the North. So thank you for providing me with the opportunity to provide a summary of how these supplementary estimates will support the important work ahead to deliver on our shared priorities to build a strong, resilient future for the North and the Arctic. Kuyanamik Miigwech, thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Right to the second. Well done.
Perfect.
And now we'll go to our second minister, Minister Anand Sangari. And whenever you're ready, Minister, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Kwekwe, Udlaku Tanzi, hello and bonjour. Mr. Chair, thank you for the invitation to join you here on the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And I do want to note that I'm very glad to be back at this committee and to be able to speak to all of you here. I'm joined here by the Honourable Dan Vandal, as well as officials from Saranac you introduced earlier, including Valerie Gideon, our Deputy Minister. Let me start with a few words about the journey of reconciliation we're on together with Indigenous partners, with all of you on this committee who advance this work each and every day, with Ministers Vandal, Haidu, and with all of our colleagues in Parliament. It's an important journey toward taking a system that was set up to implement the Indian Act, enforce the residential school system, and ultimately assimilate Indigenous peoples, and instead make that very system deliver results for Indigenous peoples. This is no easy task. It requires undoing hundreds of years of colonial history. 2015 was a turning point in Crown Indigenous relations. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission handed us a roadmap to reconciliation through the 94 calls to action. And Canadians elected a government that pledged its most important relationship was the one it had with Indigenous peoples. Together with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the former approach of making decisions on behalf of Indigenous peoples has shifted dramatically and irrevocably to an approach centered on supporting the aspirations of Indigenous people and communities, or in other words, Indigenous self-determination. Today, we're in a new era of Indigenous relations, characterized by spending on resolving historical injustices, and recognizing and supporting Indigenous governments in advancing their goals. Or in other words, the painful path we've come from and the road that lies ahead. On the road ahead, I see hope. I see hope from the agreements that give Indigenous peoples control over what they always should have had control over: their lands, waterways, their governments, child welfare, education. In places like the Nisga'a Nation territory, I've seen how modern treaty has the power to deliver real results. I see hope in the form of rights recognition. Last month with the Haida Nation, I was honored to be in the Senate to witness the introduction of Bill S-16, recognizing the Council of the Haida Nation as the holder of their inherent rights of governance and self-determination. There's a lot of work ahead, and it is clear to me that we cannot do the work without building a relationship based on trust. The road we come from is a bumpy one, and we have to make amends for that. While I was in British Columbia recently, I visited the Maski First Nation. Their reserve lands were severed from them in 1908 by railway, and they were never compensated. Chief Alice McKay told me point blank she does not like the word reconciliation. There was no relationship to reconcile, she said. But she also said the settlement gave her hope for our relationship going forward. La résolution de ce genre de...
Resolving claims like this one is how we build trust.
96% de cette estimation sont
96% of these estimates relate to the funding of various settlement agreements aimed at repairing the past.
much work to do. Reconciliation is not a one-time event. It is a multi-generational journey. The calls to actions are not something that can be checked off a list. They require ongoing and sustained commitment and action. There are real challenges ahead. We have to do more to put an end to the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered, for example. More needs to be done to change to joint decision-making, like the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee. I have now said it many times, the road ahead is long. I'm thankful for the people here in this committee who are as committed to the journey as I am. Together, we will make sure that Long Roads ends in reconciliation. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, merci, thank you, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Minister. Let's jump right into our first round of questions, and I believe I have Mr. Zimmer up first for 6 minutes. And to say we'll start as soon as Mr. McLeod passes around some of his pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and or Chair, and thank you, ministers, for coming today. There is an affordability crisis in Northwest Territories. Here's a bill from Chris, a local resident in Yellowknife. For one bill, $823.35. That's one bill in January. There's another bill he also received to top up that tank again in January for another $1,128.88 for a total of $1,952.23 for 1 month, Minister, of which $199 of that is a carbon tax, and that is set to go up April 1st, as you know. Next person that from Yellowknife is a person named Adam. He had to fill up his heating oil tank 3 times in January. Once for $499, once for $1,500, once for $730, for a total of $3,203.09. Again, just in January. Carbon tax alone, $319.47. This is from Eric, also from Yellowknife. Sir, this is addressed to me. Sir, in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, I truly thank you for your efforts in the House to enlighten members of the challenge, all Northerners, your constituents as well, I live in Northern BC, to challenges of heating our homes and businesses. As you know, there are many regions that simply do not have heating alternatives to fossil fuels, at least until new technologies offer cost-acceptable alternatives, are the only options we have at the moment. In addition to the add-ons of the carbon tax and the transportation of fuels to northern communities, the tax itself, along with the GST on top of that tax, is driving northern living costs well beyond reasonable financial tolerances, as I just laid out. I know you all know this, but as Northerners, it's difficult to understand how the current Liberal government is so out of touch with the realities of northern living costs. To suggest heat pumps are the answer, as the Liberals have suggested, find parts for Eastern Canada, they work in some places in Canada, is beyond comprehension. Keep up the good work on behalf of all Northerners and Canadians for that matter. Best regards, Eric. And now we see from the Northwest Territories, we see the new Premier is asking for an exemption because of these high costs to his citizens. Quote, I mean, ideally, a complete exemption for the Territory is what we would hope for, said R.J. Simpson, Premier of the Northwest Territories, just a few months ago, as you probably have heard. As you know, Northwest Territories previously had the residents, they gave their residents rebates, but this your Ottawa Northwest Best government stepped in and would no longer allow Northwest Territories residents to rebate their citizens. This from the Deputy Premier. When the federal government recently made the changes to exempt home heating oil that didn't automatically apply because they've done what they've done, they've changed the goalposts on us. Deputy Premier Wozniak said. And when others were granted a temporary carbon tax exemption on home heating oil and other provinces wanted an exemption, your colleague, Environment Minister Guilbeault, said, sorry, no more exemptions on my watch. From CBC, Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault said he will not stand for any further adjustments to Canada's carbon pricing system. Quote, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing, Guilbeault told Canadian Press in an interview. My question to you, Minister, is quite simple. Will you support the people of Northwest Territories and their government and exempt them from the carbon tax? Or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing?
Thank you for asking a very fulsome question of almost 4 minutes. So I guess I'm going to get the rest of the time to actually answer without being cut off. I agree with you. There's a real affordability issue in the North and the Arctic. It's not, unfortunately, it's not new, but we're doing our best to address it.
The question, though, Minister,
that's one of the reasons.
Well, the question, though, Minister, isn't what you're saying, though.
I will answer it, but give me some time. Don't interrupt me.
It's a real simple
Speaker,
question.
Mr.
Do you support the people of Northwest Territories, or will you support your colleague, the Minister of the Environment?
I answered the question in a fulsome way as he asked
as we discussed, we get to ask questions. We need to answer them.
It's a simple.
There's an affordability question in the North,
the clock, but yeah, and I just asked
why.
to talk over each other. So, Minister, will go to you, and I'll restart the clock with a minute and a half left.
Which is why we brought in $10 a day childcare, something that saves families in Nunavut, in Northwest Territories,
Excuse me, Minister,
in
it's a question
Yukon,
about the carbon
thousands
tax.
of dollars a day. This member and his party voted against it. That's why we
Mr. Chair,
brought
sorry,
in dental
he's not
care,
even answering
Mr.
the question.
Speaker,
The question,
for children
Minister,
under
is about
12 years
carbon
old.
tax. Chair, this is my time. He's here to answer our
He's
questions.
interrupting me.
I'm asking a question about the carbon tax, a very clear question, and I'll repeat it because I'll just so you know what the question is. Will you support?
Let me.
It's a carbon tax question.
Just one person at a time. I'm going to talk now. I'll let you repeat your question.
Sure.
It'll go to the minister.
Come on,
I'd
he
say
took
let's
4
afford
minutes
the minister time
to ask his question. You're going to ask him to repeat it?
Well,
okay, so the question, once again, and just to make it very clear, it makes it really easy to answer it, and you can choose. I gave you two options.
I'm answering your affordability question.
Will you support
the people?
your
affordability question.
Mr.
You're not
Minister,
letting me.
I would love to ask you this question again, but you're interrupting me. This is my time,
You
not
took
yours.
4 minutes to ask
This is
your
my
question.
time, though.
Let me
6
answer
minutes
it.
belongs to me,
Mr. Chairperson,
Minister.
get a hold
He
of
obviously
this
doesn't
committee.
want to answer a carbon tax question. But I will ask you once again, will you, Minister of Northern Affairs, will you support the people of Northwest Territories and specifically exempt Northwest Territories from the carbon tax? Because they're asking for an exemption. This is the choice you can make as government. Will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing? Which is it, Minister?
Okay, can I answer the question?
Yeah,
please.
There's 15 seconds left, so...
Come on. This is not real.
It's a simple question.
There's an affordability issue in the North. That's why we brought in childcare. He voted against it. That's
Once
why
again,
we
he
brought in
simply
dental
won't answer
care
the question.
for kids 12 and under. He voted against it. And that's why we brought in the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted 500,000 children out of poverty. Him and his party voted against it.
Guess
That's
you
what
won't
I
be
have to say on
answering that question,
affordability.
Minister.
We're out of time on the first 6 minutes. We're going to go now to Mr. Carr, who I believe is splitting his time with Ms. Gainey. So the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Vandell, thanks for being here. I'm going to take 1/85th of the time to ask my question. Is this real? Minister, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek. It's nice to have you here. I wanted to ask a question about Churchill. The town of Churchill in northern Manitoba, as you know, is critical to our province. And I recognize that our colleague, Madame Ashton, has joined. I think she's still with us, has joined us today, and of course represents the good people of northern Manitoba. Minister, Churchill, through its people, its rail line, its port, plays a critical role in the economic, defense, security of our province and our country, and certainly plays a critical role in terms of our relationship with Indigenous peoples. Can you tell the committee a little bit about some of the most recent investments that the government has made in the town of Churchill, and how you see that being critical to the future, not only of Manitoba, but of Canada as well? Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a very important question for not only for Manitoba, but for Canada in the Arctic. First of all, let me back up a little bit. Back when we were elected in 2015 or 2016, the whole railway and port were shut down because the private American owner who owned it simply did not put any money into maintenance. So it had to shut down when there was flooding in northern Manitoba. Climate change is real, especially real in the north. Through leadership of your father, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars to reopen the rail line, to reopen the port, and we found new owners to operate it, who are First Nation-owned Arctic Gateway Group. It's a collective of First Nations and mayors from small towns in northern Manitoba who've assumed ownership of the Port of Churchill and the rail line that leads up to the port. In fact, we were up there about 1 month ago to announce an investment of another $30 million from the federal government and $30 million from the brand new NDP provincial government. That money will be used to further stabilize the railroad that leads up to the Port of Churchill. There is a new technology they are using. It's called some sort of honeycomb technology that they're building under the rail lines to make sure that the rail line is stable to not only deliver goods to the port, but also accept goods to the port. Through wonderful partnerships with now the province of Manitoba and our Arctic Gateway Group, we invested again in the rail line to finish the rail line stabilization. More investment, and I'm proud to say, this summer they will be accepting minerals from northern Manitoba mine and delivering them to the Port of Churchill for export. But not only that, they will be accepting a cruise ship for the first time in quite a while in the Port of Churchill, which will revitalize the community and make sure that it'll be great for tourism. And this is the start of we hope many new business endeavors in the Port of Churchill.
Thanks very much, Minister. I'm very appreciative of your personal support and the support of the government in terms of the development of northern Manitoba. Ms. Gainey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I met recently with an organization called Avatak, which is located actually in my riding, dedicated to preserving and documenting Inuit art, culture, and archaeological artifacts in Nunavik. Their work is really impressive, and the archives contain really a tremendous collection of Inuit artifacts. But when we're speaking about Canada's north at large, it is an area with obviously unique challenges. You've touched upon them: food insecurity, the impacts of climate change. Arctic and Northern research plays a vital role in increasing Canada's knowledge of the Arctic, fighting climate change, and improving the food security in the north. Minister Vandal, can you tell us a little bit about the update and give us an update or give us a sort of sense of the state of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station?
Yes, that's a great question. I had the pleasure of visiting the Canadian High Arctic Research Station with the Prime Minister, Minister Joly, and also NATO chairperson Jen Stoltenberg recently. And I can tell you there's incredible interest in the High Arctic from many people, many countries, from NATO, and it was a real eye-opener as to the cutting-edge research they are doing at Canadian High Arctic Research Station. There were researchers there from all over the world who are doing cutting-edge Arctic research. As we know, climate change is very real. It's the North is warming 3 times the rate of the South, and that's really going to threaten a lot of traditional way of life. Not to mention the whole issue of microplastic pollution. There were researchers from Europe doing some incredible research on microplastics in the North that are being found in the ice all over the North, and that's a real concern. The climate crisis is existential crisis for our world, and we need some good northern research that is being done in the High Arctic Research Station.
Great, thank you. We're out of time there, and we're now going to go to Monsieur Lemire, who will have 6 minutes.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Ananda Sangari, you are responsible, of course, for the relationship with the indigenous communities and self-determination, and self-determination has an economic aspect of it. If they have to have all the economic means to develop themselves economically, First Nations and these communities. And there is a young entrepreneur that I met last week, Jason Picard-Binet, who produces shoes. So the vitality of indigenous communities is a source of pride, and it is very important to support these communities. Bastien's company was established, and it dates back to the 1800s, and the company was taken over. In 2022, the new ownership came in. They are in the Wendat Nation. So they need, of course, support to continue in their activities, and they are trying to have access to new markets, international markets, and exports. The Can Export program, well, they don't have any exceptions for registered enterprises. So would you be open to introducing an exception to the Act to allow a company like his to have better access to markets, and because there are certain exceptions already in place in Canadian heritage?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Incredible businesses that are being run and started by Indigenous people across Canada. I know very recently there's been a move, especially by the Minister of Trade, who I actually spoke to about this last night, as she goes around the world to promote Canadian businesses. One of the things that she wants to advance is to have Indigenous people as part of her delegation, businesses that can market their products to the world. So to your specific question, I think we can definitely make the connection, and depending on where the opportunities lie and where the interests may lie, we can definitely connect them to the Minister of Trade and her team and global affairs to be able to promote the products. With respect to the specific exemption you're looking for, I'm not familiar with that particular issue, but I will be able to get back to you and we can continue this conversation. But there is an obligation, absolutely, to ensure that we support Indigenous entrepreneurs to be able to self-determine their future and to be able to build wealth and intergenerational wealth that will enable them to be fully secure financially and by all other means as well.
Merci, c'est apprécié.
Thank you. It's really appreciated. I would also like to talk about authenticity and appreciation, culturally speaking. In the United States, they have a very strict law to protect industries that produce typically indigenous products, and Bastien's company have to prove that their products are authentic indigenous products. And there's an SW Indian Foundation certification. Indian Craft and Act is the law in the United States. So there are calls to action 31.1 and 31.2 that refer to similar measures, but nothing is being done at the moment by Canadian Heritage. So a company like this, how do they make sure that they are really an Indigenous company, so that puts Indigenous entrepreneur in a very disadvantageous position? Would you be open and ready to help such producers and such Indigenous companies that produce typical Indigenous products? And will you be willing to work more in line with the appreciation aspect of things?
Look, my role as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations is to be an advocate, both within government but also outside, to ensure that the Indigenous people not only are able to self-determine and set up their own structures, but also to advocate on their behalf towards structural challenges and limitations that may exist within the Canadian state. So I would look forward to that conversation and to be able to support and work with you as well as the business that you're talking about to be able to obtain the requisite exemptions and recognition that may be required for them to be able to trade, for example, with the U.S. or other markets.
Merci. Miigwech, un des derniers points.
Thank you. We would also appreciate your contribution when it comes to Indigenous financial institutions. The Wendake has such organization, and they are more involved in long-term financing. Their budget will come to an end on the 31st of March, 2024. They are asking for $154 million to be able to introduce new mortgage programs, and they have a whole host of investment programs in Indigenous communities and in developing businesses there. Would you be open to support these communities and give them a good news as part of the next budget?
We are out of time, but I'll give the Minister a brief response.
Par souci de respect pour le délai de traduction.
I mean, just to observe the slight delay with the interpretation, maybe we can give a couple more seconds. Thank you.
So I'm going to invite Deputy Valerie Gideon to respond to this question.
Oui, j'allais juste mentionner que c'est les services.
I just wanted to mention that Indigenous Services Canada, they have more direct financing with NACA, but there are also economic development agencies in the different regions. There's the SEDQ in Quebec that met with NACA. I am the chair of FedNord, the North of Ontario Development Agency. So I would be happy to engage with my colleagues and talk to these agencies to carry our message to these to the people in charge. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ashton, it's now over to you for your 6 minutes.
Thank you. My first question is to Minister Anand-Desangri. In the fall economic statement, it became clear that this government is moving away from Indigenous peoples being this government's most important relationship, as you mentioned. Not only is this government cutting funding at a time of great need, but a number of programs are being sunsetted, including those that deal with the harmful and destructive legacy of residential schools. There's currently no plan to fund this program past 2025, and communities are concerned. 3 years ago, Pimicikamak First Nation here in northern Manitoba was clear that they wanted to work with the International Commission on Missing Persons to help them with the searches of the burial grounds of the residential school on their territory. This contract is slated to end this year. Why has your department failed to work with Pimicikamak and the ICMP? And are you willing to extend the programming available to Cross Lake at this time? And I will point out the great irony is that Canada is willing to work with organizations like the ICMP in Ukraine and Iraq, but unwilling to support First Nations who want to work with them here at home. So much for reconciliation. So back to my question, what is your plan to support Pimicikamak and their desire to work with ICMP, as others have expressed as well, given this program being sunsetted?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Ashton. At the outset, let me just say that the work around unmarked graves is critical towards ensuring there's justice accountability, closure, and ability for communities to heal. ICMP was contracted to do some work for the Government of Canada. It is one of several organizations that are able to support communities. There's been a range of views with respect to individual communities being able to access a type of services, which is essentially DNA testing and additional work around exhumed bodies. And ICMP is one of those players in this space. There are others as well that offer the type of service. And ultimately what it comes
Sorry,
down
Minister,
to...
just to be clear,
If I may respond to Ms. Ashley,
well,
if I may
I'd like you to respond in terms of Cross Lake, not who the other players are. Cross Lake is asked to work with the ICMP, so that's what I'd like to hear about.
So our objective is to ensure that there's self-determination over the type of agency or partner that they want to work with. And if Cross Lake wants to work with ICMP, then that is something that we will facilitate. And there's absolutely no reason why we won't be able to do that. Ultimately, it comes down to the notion of self-determination, and it will be determined on a community-by-community basis based on the wishes of the community.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to Minister Vandal on Nutrition North. In the last fiscal year, Northern Affairs allocated $134 million to Nutrition North, and almost half of that money went to the Northwest Company, a massive corporation that made $119 million of profit last year. The Nutrition North program is supposed to bring down grocery prices for Northerners, but instead we're seeing it help CEOs. According to a recent study at U of T Mississauga, only 67 cents of each dollar in subsidy is passed on from groceries to consumers. People here in northern Manitoba, in Nunavut and elsewhere are experiencing significant hardship, and Nutrition North is not working for them the way it's supposed to. When a family-sized box of cereal is $17.99, a liter of olive oil $36.59, and the list goes on. Presumably, the minister and nobody in the government would tolerate paying this price for their own groceries. So why should Northerners? What is this government doing to address real food insecurity in the North, and also to ensure that Nutrition North funds are not going to line the profits of companies like the Northwest Company?
Great question, MP Ashton. I know that food security is incredibly important to the North. I was in Inuvik, Northwest Territories, back in 2022, and I announced an extra $163 million of new money for Nutrition North. But I'll get right to the issue that was at APTN about a month ago. And our government is absolutely committed that 100% of the retail subsidy is passed on directly to Northerners. We are committed to that. We have started an internal review of the program. I've personally had a meeting with the researchers who were the researchers who've come up with that analysis, and we will continue to work together. There's an internal review of the program, and once that is done, there will be an external audit of Nutrition North, specifically the retail subsidy. But I can say that Nutrition North is more than just the retail subsidy. We also co-developed the Harvester Support Grant with Northern and Indigenous partners, something that helps and aids Northern partners to go out and hunt, trap, and fish for traditional country foods. It's something that's incredibly popular. It's something, as I mentioned, was co-developed with Inuit and other Northern partners, and it's a way to get traditional foods back into the diets of Northerners. We've also included a community foods program. We're working with schools. We're working with...
We are out of time now, so I'm going to need to move to my next one. Yeah, sorry, Ms. Ashton. Before I go to the next round, which is going to be for 5 minutes, I just want to reinforce that we really can only have one person speaking at a time. It's impossible for the interpreters to do their job if we have people speaking over each other. I would also say that when we have a question asked to the minister, we should give perhaps an equal amount of time for a response. and for consideration. But it really is the members' time to control the time slot for their questions where they want to go with
I
it.
appreciate the equal time, but that's not in the standing orders. It's the
No,
actual
no,
time
I'm
is
just,
allotted to us as members, and so that's up to us, I guess.
And I'm saying.
I
that
hope
the other
I get a
piece-
quick answer.
The other piece is that it is the members' time, and we do generally let the members
Point of privilege,
direct when they.
though. If the member takes 4 minutes to ask a question, a fulsome question on affordability, I should be given 30 seconds to answer without being interrupted.
Well, and I'm just saying that, it is the members' time, but if we're asking questions, we should hear answers, and that's what I'm going to ask that we do here. So I see Mr. Zimmer is up for the next round of questions, and so he has 5 minutes. Watch for the yellow card, because that means we're getting close to the end, and with the red card, we'll cut it off and move on. So, Mr. Zimmer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have is, sorry, can I start? I'm not sure if there's a point of
From the
privilege
top.
being made
From the
here
top.
or what by somebody. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And it's been previously just asked by another member from the NDP about food prices in the north. I'm going to specifically be asking you about food prices and the carbon tax, how they affect food prices in Yukon. And I'm going to list some food prices here that I read it out because it's really shocking, like some of the prices that have already been read out today. Now, I'm going to start out. These are compared. These are stats from Yukon specifically. So they're comparative of Alberta, British Columbia, and Whitehorse. Oranges, Alberta, $4.09. British Columbia, $4.38. Whitehorse, $6.12. Potatoes, Alberta, $6.98. BC, $7.04. Whitehorse, $15.85 for potatoes. 3, Alberta, BC again. Alberta for bacon, $7.33 for 500 grams. BC, $7.38 for 500 grams. Whitehorse, $11.17 for the same 500 grams. Let's talk pork chops. 1 kilogram of pork chops in Alberta, $9.46. In BC, it's $9.49. In Whitehorse, it's $15.26. My last product here, steak, sirloin. Alberta, $22, and this is for a kilogram. $22.66 per kilogram in Alberta. BC, it's $24.06. In Whitehorse, it's $35.16 a kilogram. Certainly expensive. I spoke with Mark today. He's a local grocery store in Dawson City. He lives in Dawson City. He goes into work every day to try and keep prices low for his customers. I've seen it with my own eyes. He really works to keep those prices down for his neighbors. But he currently pays a 58% fuel surcharge on every grocery shipment that comes from Edmonton because of the carbon tax. And that will quickly rise to almost 70% on top of already high food prices April 1st. This week, you might have seen it, Minister. Yukon MLA Wade Eschenko made a motion in the Yukon legislature to axe the carbon tax for Yukon because he lives in Yukon and sees for himself the high prices caused by Liberal carbon tax firsthand. Seeing these out of food, I think he sees it himself. It's not like we need to. I live in northern BC. I don't live actually in Yukon to experience that higher prices. We have high prices in northern BC. But he sees them firsthand. He hears from his residents and his constituents really the plight of trying to buy food and keep food affordable in Yukon. So I'll ask this question, Minister, and I hope you can answer it quickly. Will you support the people of Yukon and exempt Yukoners from the carbon tax? Or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing?
I would answer that affordability in the north is a real issue. That's why we are addressing it on many different levels. The price of food is too expensive, but it's simplistic to say that it's only the price on pollution that's causing it. There are many, many variables and factors in the price of food. I travel the north a lot, probably more than you do, and I can tell you that what people talk to me about is the environment. The price on pollution is an environmental plan, along with many, many other initiatives.
But Minister,
Mr. Speaker,
it's not working.
When I go to
an environmental
Northwest
plan, it
Territories,
simply isn't working.
people talk to me about wildfires.
Yeah.
They talked to me about all businesses. 70% of people living in Northwest Territories had to be evacuated.
It's a tax plan, not an environmental
were
plan.
Shut down.
There's targets that you're setting that aren't even being met
months,
in the north.
And it cost literally millions of dollars. It cost Canadians millions of dollars to take care of the repercussions.
You're making life unaffordable for Northerners as it is.
I'm just going to stop the clock. There's 45 seconds left.
Our poor translators, how are they able to translate that when they're, this is coming into a debate instead of a question being asked and answered. So let's be respectful of our poor translators who have to go through this.
I just reinforce.
I gave the minister a lot of time to answer my simple question about the carbon tax, and he went on and talked about something else. So I'll ask.
I answered it
in my last time
3 minutes of question
that I have.
Will
you support?
The minister some time. Anyway, sorry. There's 45 seconds left, so the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Again, I'll come back to my question. You can answer it with one final simple answer, and it's really between two options. Will you support the people of Yukon and exempt? This is the question. Will you exempt Yukoners from the carbon tax, as is being asked? Or will you support your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, and his promise, as long as I'm the Environment Minister, there will be no more exemptions to carbon pricing? Simple.
That's not a question. That's a slogan. 8 out of 10 families in Canada receive more money in the rebates.
You know that's not true, Minister.
No, that is true.
It's not
that
true.
Is
you
true.
Know it. PBO has actually come out and said that it's not true. And you sat in the House like I did today to hear our leader explain exactly why it's not true.
I have a question for you.
True.
If that's not true in 2021, why did you run on a price on pollution?
That's the end of our 5 minutes there.
You.
Okay,
thank
so going to stop there and go next to Mr. McLeod.
Well fed and everything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both ministers for joining us here today. My question is to Minister Vandal. Minister Vandal, last summer was a very challenging time for us in Northwest Territories. It was the worst wildfire season we ever seen in our history, the worst one on record for sure. And 3 of our largest communities were evacuated. In fact, 70% of the territory's population was evacuated, and that meant there was huge costs incurred to the government, but also to businesses, and many businesses had to close for a fairly long period of time. I wanted to ask you if you could expand on what supports the federal government has done to help the Northwest Territories recover. But I also want to say thank you for making yourself very available over the summer and responding, especially to me, whenever I picked up the phone, and that was very much appreciated. And my second question is, because we know we're already hearing that this coming summer may be even worse than last summer. We're experiencing drought conditions already. We got very little snowfall on the southern part of the territories, and the government of Northwest Territories is already predicting a very bad fire season. So can you just talk a little bit about what we're doing, what the government is doing to help the territories recover, and what are we doing to try to prepare for this coming fire season?
Thank you so much for that important question. And I know that last year I was in Inuvik with the Premier of Yukon, the Premier of Northwest Territories, and that was just the beginning of the wildfires that had already started, but it was just near the beginning. And I tell you, the smoke was so thick that we had to get out of Inuvik much earlier than planned, and that was just the beginning. Things got significantly worse than that. So I really felt for the people who, the older people, the elders, the youth, people in hospitals who had to be moved. I thank you for your advocacy, your help. We were on the phone many times, and not just to me, to many other ministers. Our government stepped up right away to help residents evacuate and return home. We provided across Canada, I think, $300 million to help provinces and territories increase firefighting resources, of which 28 million specifically to support the Northwest Territories wildfire response. I know that eventually, and I did visit some of the folks from Northwest Territories in Edmonton, and it was good to touch base with them and talk to them with the Premier of NWT. Eventually, when they opened up, Canmore was there with a significant amount of funding for businesses to open up again and to recoup some of their losses. And speaking with Minister Sajjan, who played a very important role, I know that they've trained a significant amount of Northwest Territory firefighters to prepare for next year, and we hope that next year is not as bad as last year. But it all comes down to we need a credible climate plan, and the price on pollution that we are implementing is a significant part of that credible climate plan. There's many other initiatives that are included, climate adaptation. There's a lot of initiatives that are included in that, but that's something that our government is addressing head on. That's something that the party on the other side of the lobby really have no plan. And that's something that we're going to keep moving. We're going to work cooperatively with the territorial government, with First Nations, with the Indigenous nations that live there. We're going to have their backs in the upcoming year.
And we're at the end of the time there. We're going to go now to Monsieur Lemire, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Anna Lasangeri, I'd like to ask you two quick questions. If you can answer them quickly, that'd be really appreciated. When it comes to the lack of legislation on First Nation policing services, we have to recognize that these are essential services, and we need resources and financing for Indigenous policing services. They need the infrastructure, the personnel, and they do not always have access to these things. When can we expect a bill to allow these essential services?
Minister LeBlanc is charged with co-developing legislation on First Nations policing, and I believe his department's undertaking consultations on how to move forward. It's in terms of timelines, I can't give you. It is something that you should pose to Minister LeBlanc, but it is very much part of his mandate to be able to develop and to ensure that there's First Nations-led policing within communities.
Merci, vous soulignez.
Thank you. You were underlining the importance of consultation with First Nations in your answer. There is an issue that's impacting one of my communities in my riding, and of course many other communities. The Chalk River facility, nuclear waste storage facility, some communities are against the construction, and the matter will be taken to the courts to suspend the construction of this facility. Do you think that the procedure was done properly and with consultation in mind, especially in this time of reconciliation?
The decision on Chalk River that is before that is, I believe, before the court, so I won't be able to comment specifically on the process itself, but I do want to acknowledge the concerns I've heard, particularly from members of your community. I was able to meet with the chief of the Kibawak First Nation yesterday, and I will continue to engage with him and others. The concerns with respect to process is something that we can address on a going forward basis. But with respect to the decision and the pending legal challenges, I think it's probably best I don't comment on that.
Okay, thanks. And we're
Merci, Miigwech.
Thank you.
And Ms. Ashton, you have the last 2.5 minutes, so whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My questions are to Minister Vandal. First of all, as you are aware, the Saizi Dene and Denisoleen First Nation to Julie Lake and Lac Brochet have outstanding issues relating to the Nunavut devolution agreement. Despite their attempts to resolve them with you and your department prior to the signing, that did not take place. Are you still intending to work with these two First Nations to resolve the issues that they have raised?
Absolutely, and I met with the both First Nations several weeks before we signed the Nunavut devolution agreement. I committed to them that they will be treated fairly all the way through the process, that nothing in the Nunavut devolution agreement deviates or takes away from their Section 35 rights. And the government of Canada will continue to negotiate in good faith with both First Nations, which is really not my my ministerial responsibility, but Minister Hernandez Sangre.
Well, I know that both First Nations are disappointed that the unresolved issues were not resolved prior to the signing and are very much looking forward to resolving the outstanding issues as soon as possible. To the point around not just Nutrition North, but more broadly affordability. As you know, many First Nations here in northern Manitoba face a high cost of living because they depend on the ice roads that are increasingly unreliable as a result of climate change. I raised this question to Minister Hajdu, but it is intimately related to the question of subsidizing Nutrition North, food security, particularly here in northern Manitoba. As the minister responsible for Nutrition North, do you support the calls of First Nations on the east side of Lake Winnipeg, as well as further north, who have been clear they want a reinstatement of the East Side Road Initiative, and they are calling on the federal government to invest in all-weather road infrastructure, including an airport for Wasagamak First Nation, investment in the stretch between St. Teresa Point and Barons River, as well as the northern lake between Oxford House and Garden Hill. These are all First Nations that depend on Nutrition North and subsidies. These are all First Nations that are facing extremely high costs of living, and an all-weather road in the age of climate change would make a real difference. Do you support these First Nations calls for federal investment in all-weather road infrastructure?
Sorry, and I'll just say a brief answer would be appreciated. We are at the end of the 2.5 minutes, but Minister, please respond.
Absolutely, I do. Climate change is real. Winter roads are going to become more rare as time passes. That means the federal government and the provincial governments are going to have to work together to make sure that all of the roads are constructed in the north.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, that takes us to the end of the resources, the time that we have available today. We do have invitations out for all three ministers to come back to speak with us about the mains, as well as a request for SUPSB that we've been working on trying to land since before Christmas. So hope to see all of you again soon, but for tonight, we are adjourned.
Merci à l'équipe.